Deepak Parekh, the legend in the Indian industry and Indian financial circles, the person who helped make the middle class dream of owning one's own home a reality. Mr. Parekh has suggested that we can maybe 2 or 3 minutes address them, and then perhaps plunge straight into the questions and answers. So, without further ado, let me give the microphone.
Thank you. No, I've done this many times before, and it's much better to have a dialogue than me talking. Because I can talk on the financial sector, or the infrastructure sector, or the economic situation in India, or what our Prime Minister is doing, or whatever you want. But I would rather have a dialogue with all of you than have a one-way traffic. So, all I can say is that there's a huge amount of euphoria and hope and hype outside India, more outside than in India, about India's future, about how we were and how we are going. And I've never seen this kind of excitement around the world. Every day we get 2-3 groups of people from all over the world coming and talking. Are they missing the bus if they don't invest in India? Is it too late? The markets are all-time high. What do we expect from this government? And just yesterday I had 20 people from government endowments, state of New Jersey, state of California, state of Massachusetts, all the state governments. So they only have government pension funds, and the state government pension funds. They said we have very little exposure in India, and they were on a 5-day trip to Delhi, Bangalore, and Bombay. And they are the CIOs of their different states investing in the state pension. And so there is, even at that level, big mutual funds and big money managers have invested in India from the past. But this lot we have not seen before, the state government pension. So, we have to again live up to the expectations. Will we be able to live up? We are always on a take-off stage, but we never take off. We've come to this position number of times before, where we are about to take off and somehow we have an aborted landing and something goes wrong somewhere. So we hope this is not a false alarm, and this time we are really serious about it. I think with that, let's start a dialogue. It will be much more fruitful and much more meaningful for all of us.
So the floor is open.
Sir, you were just talking about this previous stages where we have been at a stage of takeoff, but somehow it turned out to be an aborted landing. How do you think this time could be different as compared to previous such occasions?
See, this time we have a government that is leading, and not that is. We have a Prime Minister who's a doer, leading from the front, and he wants results. We've seen what he's been able to achieve in 2 years, in 2 terms plus a little in Gujarat. We've seen his acceptability and the reception he's getting all over the world when he's gone. He's in India. He's going to remain for 2 terms, and he's determined. He's a much more determined person. He has no vested interest other than growth in India. He may be a one-man show, so he doesn't have to report to anyone, like a previous Prime Minister who had to go and get consultations apart from coalition also from other coalition parties. Here we've got an absolute majority. He's the head of it. I think we have a better chance. The other factor which I'm convinced that will help us this time is never before we've seen such low commodity prices. Commodity prices in India globally have crashed. We have the 3rd largest reserves of coal in the world, but we are the largest importer of coal. We import over 100 million tons of coal annually. Coal prices have come down by 40% in 1 year, 40%. Crude has come down to 80 and falling. And all other agri products and other commodities have all collapsed, because global demand is not there. Now, if the Prime Minister is lucky that he's got this besides him, so a fiscal deficit can be contained, the current account deficit can be contained, we can come up with better numbers. What we need is, we need growth in the economy. We would say the Prime Minister of this government has. How do we create jobs? Because we may be an ancient country, but we have a young population. And we cannot satisfy them unless we give them jobs. And this is the biggest issue we have. And therefore, rightly so, the Prime Minister is pushing Make in India. Manufacturing will take jobs, and it will be successful in reducing bureaucracy, in having single window clearances, in ease of business, make it easy for businessmen to do business. I think we can get there, and we may be successful this time. So there are a number of factors which make me believe that we will be able to achieve something. And I believe that 5 years from now we will have a different India than today.
I would like to know your opinion about the financial inclusion initiative of it is believed that this Jan Dhan Yojana will help in bringing reforms in growth and prosperity. How it is
See, what we need to do, the reason or the rationale where it is started is really how do we directly transfer subsidy to beneficiaries. Today, more than 50% of the money gets wasted away, frittered away while distributing it, cost of distribution and the possibility of not getting to the right person. So the main purpose of making everyone open a bank account for 7.5 crores, I think we've been able to do up to 5 crores now, is that direct subsidy transfers can be made to their bank accounts. That's the financial inclusion angle. And it was this 1 lakh policy, life policy was thrown in, that if something happens for 1 lakh, the family is protected. Now where the government is not clear is that banks have reduced the minimum amount and all that for this class of people. There is no minimum balance necessary. You can open with any account. But you need an account to get your money directly. What is not clear is this: who's going to pay for the insurance premium? The government has not said that they're going to pay for the premium. Now, for this year, some of us have paid honorary. We have just volunteered and done it as a CSR activity. We have not taken anything, but it is only up to 31st March. Like we at HDFC have a big liability on this if there is massive amount of deaths from now till 31st March. But the government assured us that by the time the scheme gets familiar and people are aware of it, no one knows about it also. So even if poor people die, there won't be any claims on you. So you just take it. But from next year, they are going to try and see how it can be funded jointly by the insurance companies or the government and the insurance and the banks. Now, surprisingly, this 5 crore accounts that have been opened, some 500 crores have also been deposited in the bank. So it's not that this class of people do not have savings. They do have savings. And they have smaller savings. The other thing the government is trying to do is, you may have seen that RBI is pushing for small banks, payment banks. They are coming out with guidelines shortly, and they are encouraging smaller banks, local banks. See, unfortunately, the microfinance agencies in India did not take off well. They took off well, and then we had 1 or 2 bad instances. And the problem of microfinance is they sometimes lend at 22 and 23%. So it's usurious rates of interest, which the poor man is paying. So we have to find alternate ways of microfinance. Now, microfinance, the definition of microfinance is that their distribution cost is 5%. Provision is 5%, so they need a 10-12% spread. That's why they lend at 22%. But I think with this with the combination of payment banks, which will be regulated. Today, microfinance is not regulated. It is unregulated. We've seen what happened in SKS and a few others. And again, microfinance has been successful in India only in certain states, southern states, and some western states. In north, you don't have cooperative banks, you don't have microfinance agencies. So this financial inclusion is an area which we must stress on, and particularly it is to give direct credit. For instance, to give you examples, there are people, in Bombay, the driver or the person, domestic help, they remit money, they carry money when they give money to their friends who are going to their villages where their family are, because they say it takes 1 day to go to the bank, closest bank branch, and it costs money. And so they take that risk. Now with bank accounts, closer bank accounts, and you will see in the next year, banking will become the norm of it. Mobile banking will be the future because everyone in villages also have mobile phone, but they don't have a bank branch near 30 kilometers from it. So mobile banking and direct transfer with bank accounts is going to solve a lot of issues.
Sir, I'm going to bring it to the education sector and the relationship between industry and universities. Let's say, for example, we're very different in India than we see now. And one can see more and more presence of industry in delivering of education financing as well as in envisioning education as such. How do you see that whole involvement of industry with higher education? There are concerns within academia as to an increased corporatization of higher education. Do you think a good thing about it or do you see any danger to this?
I think we have a good beginning. Industry is taking interest in education, and more industries will take interest in education if they can't hire the right type of people. Today MBAs have to be retrained, today engineers have to be retrained, vocational guidance and all. Even if you have a degree, it's not that you automatically get a job. The quality of education we impart is not standard, and there are hundreds and hundreds of universities and colleges which churn out degrees, and quite a few of them are owned by politicians. And they are owned by politicians because they want to make capitation fees and they want to convert their black money into white, and there are a number of these issues. Unfortunately, where we have lost out on education is last 10 years in the UPA government, we had really no initiative in the education. We had probably some of the worst ministers and HRD minister. And that is why education took a back seat. Honestly, we had some, I don't want to name them, you know the names of previous HRD ministers. But we didn't have, we need a visionary, a futurist to be the education HRD minister. Many states don't give you permission for private universities. Private sector, if government gets out of, I was talking to Dr. Mehta, the Vice Chancellor, that why should government nominees be on the boards of trustees of institutions like IIM and others? Alumni will be better, more alumni they'll be able to raise money, they'll have better, and they are where they are today because of the education they got from the alma mater. We have to change the government interference. Now, government is interfering because they feel that the public or the poor people will be squeezed by increasing fees and the affordability of fees and level, So it's a vicious circle, but I think we have to find a fine balance which we've not yet found. Take for instance triple ITs. Many industries have adopted different triple ITs. I would have thought, and I had even suggested that government is planning to have IIMs and IITs all over the country and all India Institute of Medical Science. At least for the IITs and IIMs, they should allow corporates to sponsor it. Because they've allocated 100 crores for some 7 IIMs or IITs. What is 100 crores when you get them? But if they say that in Bhubaneswar you want an IIM, let some company, NALCO or some company there got it off and start it. That is the way to go about in education rather than government allocating small amounts of money. All India medical is a different matter because we need free beds, we need cheaper healthcare. But education should be opened up to private sector, then you form IIT, you form IIM. And the standards can be the same. Syllabus, admission fees, admission processes, admission standards can be the same.
Yes. What is your opinion on the real estate market in Ahmedabad next 5 years?
I was horrified to see the real estate market. I went around in the morning, and the two most talked about large projects by two large reputable groups like Godrej and Adani. I went to see these two projects where one was talking of building 18,000 flats at once upon a time. Now they brought it down to 9. Somehow the flats are not selling. And I know Godrej have sold some flats at 3,300 rupees a square foot. They are now available at 2,500. I know some investors who bought flats in Adani and Godrej who are unable to find a buyer. Our business in Ahmedabad is the lowest this year in the last 2 years. Baroda, Surat, Abu. Ahmedabad somehow is just not. I think this is again a thing of job creation. We have to create jobs in Ahmedabad. And we are not creating high value jobs. I talked to the TCS people. They have built a beautiful center which can take 10,000 people. They have 2,500 and they're doing back-end work, back office of Citibank New York. So the value-add jobs are not there. These are clerical jobs which they're doing where the margins are limited. So there's no incentive for TCS also, because but TCS says we can't get the right type of people. So I'm not too commercial mall shopping retail malls have collapsed. There is no demand. Commercial rents have come down significantly. And even residential units which had held up last year, I see discounts being given. And real estate market in Ahmedabad is very, very soft this year. I would say if you are buyer of real estate, go with the cash to a developer, he'll give you 20% discount of the listed price and buy it now with a really good attractive price. If you're an investor, don't touch it.
Other question. Yes, sir.
Sir, today we are talking about financial inclusion in the entire country, but in that discussion we never referred to a cooperative sector, which was the main area which is financial inclusion in our country. Why?
Cooperative sector, you mean the agri sector?
Not cooperative banks, cooperative credit societies, which once upon a time were lending as a microfinance.
You know, most cooperative banks, if you see RBI's report on cooperative banks, it is not flattery. There is no flattery there. RBI is really worried about the way cooperative banks are run in India. Most cooperative banks are not sick. Most of them are run by political parties, and you know they don't follow systems. They are a danger to the financial system. I don't think if government has their view or RBI has their view, they would convert the cooperative banks, which they have done. By the way, there was one bank called Development Cooperative Bank. They've converted from Development Cooperative Bank to DCB. Now it's a normal bank under the supervision of RBI. Cooperative banks are also under the supervision of RBI, but they don't follow any systems. And you must remember a year ago there was this accusation by all of us that we have sold policies and all under the with not proper transparency and all. There was some tape recording done by some agency, I forget the name, but most of those accounts that we got were all because of KYC norms. If a cooperative bank brings a customer to you, we assume, because it's a scheduled bank, that KYC norm is their responsibility and not ours. And that's how we people got into trouble, because we did not do KYC again. Now when we are introduced, whether it's for a bank balance, a credit card or a loan or whatever it is, if the lead comes from a cooperative bank and he's already a cooperative bank customer, we still do a KYC. Because that is how, because they don't bother about simple norms of KYC, anti-money laundering. They don't bother if the person comes with 1 lakh cash, they take it in. So cooperative banks, management of cooperative banks is not transparent at all. And I don't think the cooperative banks have a future in India.
Yes.
What are your views on the use of securitized debt instruments by housing finance companies in India?
Reserve Bank is extremely cautious and conservative. They know the US financial crisis was due to the CMOs, the securitized paper, particularly the housing paper, because it was pooled together and wrapped together and sold to one, and he sold it to someone else, they sold it to someone else. Ultimately, no one knew where it belonged. And honestly, it was there. So government of RBI is not supportive of securitization. Has not happened in India. We are unable to securitize. The main reason of securitization is accounting. If you pool some mortgages together or auto loans together and sell it to another bank, you could book your income that year, the day you sell it. RBI says if you sell a securitized bunch of loans, you cannot book any income in your way. You have to pro-rata it. If you securitize it for 5 years, you have to pro-rata it 1/5. Banks were selling securitized paper because they wanted to book front-end income to show larger profit, to show dividends, to show dividend possibilities and all that. So it was not to get, why would I sell a paper, why would I sell a loan that is performing? I would rather keep the loan in my balance sheet, unless I have shortage of capital. If capital is not there, you sell. But then it's not profit oriented, it's net worth oriented. So RBI says you cannot securitize. If you securitize, you prorate. You can't take any front-end income. Therefore, no one is interested in securitization. That's why the market has really collapsed, only on this profit.
Yes, sir. Industry is asking for rate cuts because inflation is coming down. Do you think this is base effect, and from December onwards we will once again see, because food prices and services which are not there in wholesale pricing, like most of the economists or industry people focus on WPI, whereas CPI is what I face in reality is still ruling very high. What are your views on the rate scenario?
I feel sorry for the RBI governor today. Everyone and anyone is giving him advice that he should bring rates of interest down. If you see our finance minister in one of his comments recently, he said that let the RBI, let the professionals in Bombay decide on the interest rate. You know, with a little sarcasm in it, let the professionals decide the interest rate. But he has been categorical that we need lower interest rates. But you see, if you look at the RBI governor's position, interest rate is not something you can bring down this month, take it up. There has to be some period of sustainability of lower inflation. If it's 1 month or 2 months, I would not say that we should bring down interest rates. But if it continues for 3-4 months, then there is a justification. And then you can do it to a larger degree. If you are forcing the RBI indirectly to reduce interest rates, he will in December policy, first, second or third, he will reduce it by 0.25%, which doesn't move the needle for anyone. So we want 100-200 basis points reduction, wait for 6 months, let the numbers continue for 6 months, and then you will have. But every industrialist is talking of lower interest rates. I tell the industrialists that why don't you look at cost of sales? If you pay the same attention on raw materials that you're buying, be more scrupulous on purchase, you'll save more money than a 0.5% or 0.25% interest rate. But that's the easiest thing to talk about. So everyone talks about, whether it's Sunil Mittal or anyone, they talk lower interest. And so it's become an obsession for us, this interest rate. I personally feel, because the pressure the Reserve Bank has, it have to act. And as you rightly say, that inflation in India is predominantly food inflation. By reducing interest rates, food inflation is not coming. You have to tackle food inflation separately with the Agricultural Ministry, with the Food Corporation of India, with logistics, with proper recovery of food grain, storage, redistribution. These are bigger issues than interest rates, and we need to look at that. The Agricultural Ministry, the FCI, I think FCI is one of the most inefficient public sector companies we have in India, because it's their responsibility to mobilize and collect fruits, grains, vegetables from the farmer, store it safely, and then redistribute it in other parts of the country. And if you ask, we were told by the UPA government, UPA 1, that you are in urban areas, why don't you do rural housing? So we did some survey. We took 4 villages in 4 parts of India, north, south, east, west. Housing was not amongst the top 5 priorities in rural India. Collection of food grains and produce was the third after health and education. Third, that vegetables are ready, but no one comes to collect for 1 week. And there is no storage place. We keep it outside our hut, and it gets eaten away, it gets destroyed. This is a bigger problem of collection of food grains, collection of vegetables, perishable goods, and we need to tackle that. And people say that even if you RBI cannot control food inflation, so they must bring interest rates down, because food inflation will never be contained. I don't think that's the right argument. It should be separate attack on the food situation on the agri front and FCI. No attempt has been made, unfortunately, by subsequent agricultural ministers to change the FCI habits, to improve FCI, functioning of FCI.
Follow-through question. What do you think of the Land Acquisition Act and its impact on housing industry if it is not resolved soon?
See, today BJP admits that they shouldn't have approved the Land Acquisition Act. Openly they are saying it was a mistake. And I'm sure that in this session or the budget session, they will bring an amendment to the Land Acquisition Act, because they're already talking about amending the Land Acquisition Act, which was passed about a year ago by the UPA government, and BJP supported that. I And this is Mr. Jaitley's point, that it's very difficult for us now, in such a short time, to say we disagree what we had agreed 1 year ago. But they are determined to change the land acquisition. I think they are aware of the fact that their present situation to acquisition becomes an impossibility. And paying annuity to a farmer for 23 years or something like that, you don't know who's the owner, who will come and collect, how will you keep a tab on it. It is very difficult. It's very cumbersome and it's not workable, not viable. So they'll have to look at some simpler way of land acquisition.
Yes.
Sir, in the short term, I think all over the world, the economic growth is going to slow down. So if we succeed in making India, is there a big enough market, internal market, is it big enough, or we still need to depend on exports?
No, I think if you make competitive goods at competitive prices, there is a market. But it has to be at competitive prices. You have to contain your labor costs. You have to contain your land costs. And there is a market, but you have to be competitive with China, say. China, we have to be competitive, otherwise there is no export opportunity. Domestic demand is huge. But take for instance the defense industry. In defense, India is the largest importer of defense. 15% of global manufactured defense is bought by India, 15. The next is China, who buys 7. 7% of global imports of defense equipment are by China. So it's a huge difference because, again, Mr. Antony as defense minister for 10 years did not do anything about Make in India or have collaborations with international companies to manufacture defense equipment here. Whether it is combat vehicles, or whether it is submarines, or whether it is guns, or typhoon planes, or fighter planes, whatever it is. Now I see when government has opened up for 49%, every international company in the last 3 months that manufactures defense equipment and defense planes are coming to India and talking to the Tatas and the Mahindras and the L&Ts and Bharat Forges of the world to saying that let's start a joint venture. Now defense is one area where we need it. Forget the export, we are importing massive amounts every year. And defense is not manufactured here, defense items are not manufactured here. So if we get the right collaboration, and at 49% foreign manufacturers are willing to come, I think that's a huge opportunity for creating jobs and saving your import bill. So I think we have a huge domestic market which we can cater to. So there is demand in India, and Indian demand is only going to grow.
Sir, let me add a comment to your point about the defense sector. A week ago, I did a war game at Ahmedabad, and we had invited the heads of all the OEMs from the United States, Europe, etc., from India. Many of the people involved in defense procurement, etc. And something stunning came out in the interaction. It was a 3-hour war game that we did. That even though the Navy and the Army are both part of the defense establishment, they have had very different track records. If you look at the latest ships that have been deployed, their indigenous content has been 92%. Whereas in the Army, most of it is imported. Even ammunition, if you can believe it, high-end ammunition is imported. And this is in a large measure because of very different structures that the Army and the Navy had put in place, very different processes that were put in place, and most importantly, a very different culture of acquisition. The person who's in charge in the Navy is the end user. They are the ones who are calling the shots. Whereas in the Army, somewhere, we have been lost in the bureaucratic maze, and the end user is completely lost sight of. So it is possible, it's funny that they sit next to each other in the government of India, but they have very different track records, and just going across the road or going across the building and essentially sharing best practices is not happening. And I think in a large measure it has been because of the inertia of the last Next question. Yes.
Sir.
Follow-up? Is there a follow-up?
No.
Okay, then I think for here we come back to you afterwards.
Allowing FDI in food retail sector, will that help the food retail in India?
Allowing who?
FDI?
FDI and retail.
See, FDI and retail, I think is a closed chapter. Shopkeepers support BJP. BJP wants to be in power for a long time, and they're never going to open FDI in retail. So let's close the chapter, and it's not going to happen. Even if Walmart wants it or you and I want it, it's not going to happen. It's the reality. But back end of retail, logistics, where it's open, you can have 100% open logistics. What we lack is logistics, warehousing facilities, transportation facilities. And the sky is the limit. Even if you see Snapdeal and Amazon, which are selling more than the brick and mortar shops of yours, they are unable to deliver. You know, they failed in their delivery mechanism because there's no backup. Back end is not there. So you need to have, I've seen many of these hyper stores which have come up. Different companies, the Indian corporates have started, big groups have started hypermarkets. Unless you deliver at home, you will never see an Indian housewife going to a hyper store and buying 1 week's vegetables or 1 week's food, as you see in the US or Europe or America or Britain. Transport costs are a killer, traffic is a killer. Hyper cities are, hyper shops are not around the corner. They will still go to their local Kirana store. And upgrading Kirana store is the future. And Kirana stores deliver, home delivery. If any hypermarket has to succeed, they should have a delivery mechanism, otherwise it's not going to.
And credit. Kiranas give credit also.
Credit also.
Credit and home delivery.
Home and credit, yeah.
Two quick stories on that. I remember I was talking to the head of strategy for one of the large retail chains in India. And I said, "Aapke ghar mein kahan se aata hai?" And he said, "Mere kirane se aata hai." So the funny thing was, and secondly, the back end, I think if that can be improved, that itself creates a huge opportunity. Personal story. Last night I suddenly realized I didn't have sandals to go with my kurta pajama for the convocation. So yesterday afternoon, day before yesterday afternoon, I went online and ordered a pair of sandals, and it was delivered within 24 hours in my office at Ahmedabad University, which I'm wearing right now. So I think there's a huge amount. I don't particularly care, and on Amazon. Amazon, of course, is only allowed to aggregate Indian retailers. That's great. But they have built a beautiful backend. So has Flipkart. And by the way, I could have done it on Flipkart, and I often do. But somehow for sandals, Flipkart does not have the same kind of variety. My first preference is Flipkart. So I think there's a huge potential, I think, in terms of doing that. But yes.
But you should have, I was advised to wear a suit. If you had advised me to wear kurta pajama, I could have been more comfortable.
Yes.
Sir, Prime Minister is saying that India is getting younger, and we do talk about Padega India, Tabhi Badega India. But when I see the education loan percentage versus car loan percentage in majority of the banks or financing company, I'm surprised with that. So can't we have that experts who can reverse this ratio?
The
Education loan.
Education loan percentage.
Lower than in car.
Then, yeah, that's right. The percentage that they will finance is much lower.
No, I think you have a point. Sally Mae in United States, the Student Loan Association is huge. Billions of dollars of outstanding loans. Today, nationalized banks are giving education loans. We have got a small initiative which is started called Credila, where we give education loans. And you won't believe it, we've just started a few years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, we built up a reasonable balance sheet, but every other PE is coming to us and saying, we value it at $100 million, give us 10% and all. So, without any profits, there are no profits, but the more losses you make, the more valuations you get. That's the norm of today's business. So, I agree, but you should understand that consumer credit penetration in India is single digits. Consumer credit penetration includes student loans also. There's a huge potential of consumer credit growth. Even in our neighboring countries like Thailand and all, it's 20-25%. Housing as a percentage of GDP is in single digits. Thailand is 17, Malaysia and Singapore is 40s. So we have a long way to go. And therefore, retail lending by banks is going to be a huge business as we go. And education will get its due share. point is that, really becomes an unsecured loan. How do we, like a housing or a car or something, there's some tangible security. What do we do in an education loan? It is unsecured. Personal guarantee is nothing in an education loan. The borrower can't give a personal guarantee. He is the borrower. He is giving a guarantee. So there's no tangible security. And other than a moral responsibility.
So we do have a lot of experts. Can't make some policies on that? That is my question actually.
So we are trying to tell our borrowers who's taken housing loans that if your children want education loans, we are happy to extend it with the mortgage. Since we already have the mortgage, we have the advantage because the values of your houses have gone up, shot up, while the loans are coming down on a monthly basis. So there's huge collateral available. You can use it for educating your kids.
So regarding the next budget, the union budget, how do you predict that for the next fiscal?
It has to be a growth-oriented budget. I think one of the 3 or 4 things that the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister pushing is GST. He will do everything within his power to see that GST can be introduced as soon as possible. A couple of BJP states are opposing some of the, including Gujarat, had some opposition on some items on the GST. I think these are behind us because automatically if GST is introduced, GDP will grow faster. And that's what they want to see, that with this government GDP is grown. So GST will be, whatever needs to be done to make GST happen will be in this budget. They'll want it in 15-16 to be rolled up. Second is growth. How do you have growth? And third is job creation. I think these are the things which, whatever is needed, he may bring back investment allowance if you start a new factory. We have investment allowance, some incentives. If you put new plant and machinery, we can get higher depreciation, front-end depreciation. Something like that they'll have to introduce because, so far we don't see much movement on the ground. No Indian businesses are saying that I'm starting a new steel mill or I'm starting a new cement plant or a textile unit. We've not seen any of that. And we need manufacturing. We don't need retail. Retail we will grow, but ultimately only jobs are created. Today, unfortunately, jobs are only being created in IT and back office. IT and back office jobs are being created. And, we do a huge amount of outsourcing for overseas companies. And IT income helps us in our import of fuel because we get a massive amount of export earnings. But manufacturing is which can take jobs. We need that. See, if you see the composition of India's GDP over the last 20 years, it has changed totally. It has majority of it, 60-70% of it, 65 or 67% of it is services. 20 years ago, it was 30%. So that has doubled. Industry has come down, agriculture has come down. And we need to take that industry is the lowest of the 3 components. We have to bring industry up.
So if there is investment from foreign countries, like now here is promoting foreign companies to come and invest, it will change the scenario.
No, it will, but it takes time. You can't come tomorrow and start manufacturing. It is a 1-2 year, 3 year process. So you have to give it time. We want instant results, but it's not possible.
One last question.
What's the scene on the energy sector, especially the non-conventional energy? There should be a new thought process now in the energy sector. That's the main issue.
See, I think we have to admit that non-renewable, non-conventional energy like wind and power, if you look at any projection by any think tank or any energy economist, even 20 years from now, it will not be more than 10% of your energy requirements. Nuclear is not going to be more than 5% of your energy. So between nuclear and wind and solar, it's not going to be more than 15%. You have to depend on coal, gas. They are the principal raw materials for energy in India. Wind and solar experiments have shown that you can increase it to some extent, but not to that extent that 30-40% of your energy comes from it. Hydro, yes, because we have adequate hydro, but again, putting up hydro plants is such a long process and it has huge amount of environmental issues. So I would say we have to, whether we like it or not, gas is the main. We have to depend on gas. We have to bring out more gas from under the ground. We have to have more realistic gas pricing. We must give incentives for oil exploration. None of the NELT, we are at 14 NELT now, new exploration. None of them have discovered oil in India. I don't believe that they are serious about it. The big boys don't come to India. Not one big boy has come to India. And if you see, British Petroleum has put $7 billion with Reliance in gas. The other day, 3 months ago, when the BP CEO was there, I had breakfast with him. And he's saying, my share, I've already written down my investment in India. Secondly, my shareholders are complaining to me that if we had put the same amount and put a gas plant in Qatar, India would have bought that gas, you could have recovered the money in 3 years. We brought money into India and this is our fate. So, none of the oil companies, the big American companies are bypassing India. They're in China, they're in Burma, they're in Vietnam, but they're not in India because our policies are not enforced. Then there is a flip-flop. Each government comes, they change the policy. There's no continuity, and these are long-term projects. To be viable, you need to invest large sums of money. And so, in mining and oil, we have to have a much more open mind. Otherwise, we are not going to get. If we have large coal reserves, why are we not utilizing our own coal? Why are we importing from Australia and Indonesia? Massive amount of 120 million tons we are importing this year of coal when we have adequate coal under the ground. Because Coal India doesn't have the capacity. You don't want to denationalize coal. You want to keep it as one company's preserve. It's not going to happen. You have to have a much broader view. Otherwise, you're not going to solve your energy and mining problem.
10 minutes. I'll be being implemented.
That is being implemented. Okay. So then, we'll continue with the question. Actually, there is. Yes. You haven't asked before, right? You didn't ask a question before. Or you did. Somebody else. Yes.
Sir, I just want to know your thoughts on the implementation of the Aadhaar card. Considering the recent announcement by the Prime Minister that by June 2015, every single person should have the Aadhaar card available. So, sir, your thoughts on whether that will happen and when that happens, how is that going to change things in a country as big as ours?
No, I think we are fortunate that the government has taken a positive outlook on the Aadhaar card. And this is a story Mr. Nandan Nilekani has told me himself. The Prime Minister had called him in the early days after he became the Prime Minister and took a debriefing from him on the Aadhaar card and the continuation and how is it going according to him. At the end of it, he told Nandan that if you had not stood for elections, I would have still made you continue to complete the project. But since you stood for elections with a Congress ticket, I am unable to offer this job to you. But he took his advice, he took who are the good people, he got some names from him, and he's totally backing it. So it's a good sign that he's not discarded something which is started by the previous government. And obviously it's a passport for every Indian, it's a number every Indian will have. And it's necessary for a variety of reasons, for safety, for security, for immigration, illegal immigration, people coming into India from Bangladesh, crime detection, for a number of reasons, bank accounts. So he will implement it, and it is not going slow, it is at the same pace as it was earlier.
Let me ask you a puzzle with regard to the Aadhaar card. Ask you one puzzle. A year before the election, many Congress ministers said very briefly, Aadhaar will be our ticket to re-election just as Narega was our ticket in 2009. That we have 600 million people, 60 crore people who will have Aadhaar cards by the time of the election. And we will essentially do what we did in 2009 with the loan forgiveness program, pump in 30,000, 40,000 crores into these 600 or whatever EPL, however many of the 600 million were below poverty line. And essentially, somehow this whole thing was never talked about again. I was personally very puzzled. I don't know if you have a perspective on why the Congress party, as it were, created this as an election exercise as much as a technology exercise.
They didn't use it to their advantage.
They didn't use it to their advantage. Why do you think that might be the case? I have no clue. I'm just puzzling it out.
But I think the election effort by the Congress party was very minimal and very poorly done. So there was no coordination. You see with the results now. No unity amongst congressmen.
Yes.
So even though the new government is working towards the welfare of the country, the corruption in our country has become an integral part of our culture as well, and it's being passed down from generation to generation. Do you think in the near future or in the next 10-15 years there is a way out of this corrupt system that we have and we have to go through?
See, again, the Prime Minister has assured everyone that on April 1, 2015, every item that the government sells will be on e-auction basis. No envelopes will be required to be submitted, so you cannot transfer envelopes, replace envelopes after they're opened. And this is for spectrum allocation, this is for mine allocation, this is for coal allocation, this is for land acquisition. So for every item they will be on the net, be transparent to everyone, and the lowest bidder will get it. This is one way of reducing high-level corruption, which was there in mining, particularly in coal and mining, and even in spectrum and all. We saw what happened in the telecom scandal. So this is some of the big removal of big-time corruption by politicians. Now the small corruption, which is really hurting the common man, you have to pay money to get a death certificate, you have to pay money to get a birth certificate, you have to pay money to get a license, to renew your license, to get a passport, anything. I think that unless the giver of these services, the provider of these services is paid reasonably well, he cannot make his end meet. Policeman cannot go home and feed his children. What do you expect him to do when he catches you breaking a red light? He knows his salary is totally insufficient in today's day for survival. So he has to make a buck on the side. Similarly, a peon who puts your passport application first. It has become a fact of life. It has become a necessity for these people. So unless the salaries go up, because the cost of living in urban India is phenomenal. In big cities like Bombay, Delhi, it is impossible for a policeman or a clerk or anyone to survive, even a government servant to survive. So this petty corruption is going to remain with us till we have proper salary. And you can pay proper salaries if the employment numbers are reasonable. Government today has so much excess now. And therefore the wage bill is so high and people don't work full-day job. So I would say the big-time corruption, I feel, will come down. Now we have to bring the corruption in the states now. Real estate is one area where the maximum corruption is there. Every department takes money. Every department, whether it's the fire or the water or the civil or the sewage or planning or urban or whatever. Now that again, if we have a single window clearance, we are trying to push the government for affordable housing, have a single window clearance. For the small homes, even for there is corruption, because the same amount of approvals are needed if you are building a luxurious house or if you are building a 400 square feet. I can't be distinguished because the need is today 400 and 500 square feet homes for the people. But there is no distinction, there is no understanding in the government that is, it's a burning issue. If you don't provide homes to people, they'll come out on the streets. We'll see in India what we saw in the Middle East, in Egypt and other parts. And I hope the government appreciates and does. This is what we are expecting our Prime Minister to at least see and immediately act on some of these issues.
So, thank you so much, Mr. Parekh, for that enlightening.
Is everyone a faculty? Because I think many of them look like students today. They look like students.
All faculty.
Are you sure?
That was the question for Sanjay we raised and he received the order. He told me we have really the faculties or students.
So, asking questions.
It's good to see very young people as faculty.
Yeah.
And as you can see, a very large proportion of women. So all that remains for me to do is to thank Mr. Parekh for that enlightening interaction, where he shared his perspective from the cutting edge of business and interface with industry and with society. So thank you very much indeed.